Moving on. Brian already spoke a little bit about it, but implementation. So we're talking
Yeah.
B2B, B2C. They seem like they don't cross over too much, but in some ways they do. Are there any common difficulties that either or face, B2B, B2C? What are some of the common difficulties they face, and how is validation a solution or hygiene a solution?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think the difficulties are similar. When you're looking at your database, again, let's say you're charged with, hey, marketing manager or product owner, we have this database and we need to drive more revenue from it. I think a couple things. First is capturing new data within that email program and applying a service there. So real-time web form capture is the first most common application of this service, right? So you have your web page, and your web page then calls a validation service in real time through an API to make sure that the email address that you're capturing on that web form is valid. Um, you know, Two main things there. One, you're spending a lot of money, very likely, to drive traffic to your website, right? Maybe it's AdWords or Facebook, or maybe even branding or broadcast advertising, television. Folks get to your website, you have an opportunity to capture accurate data. Let's make sure you are best positioned to do so. We analyzed our API traffic a bit ago in the aggregate and found that about 8% of the email addresses entered on to our API were invalid. So the ROI comes quick. So the first piece operationally would be, as you capture new data, use a real-time web form to make sure that the data you're capturing is accurate and deliverable. Secondarily would be more of a batch processing. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So batch processing, I always feel, is really the first step that clients want to look at when they're either migrating data management platforms, CRM platforms, or to a new email service provider, or if someone is new into a role as an email marketing manager. I think a batch cleanup of the existing database is really good, because what it does is really uncovers the true, what I would refer to as the potential of your database. So all because there may be a million records in there doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's a million records worth of revenue, because if you're managing email for a company and whoever you're rolling up to, chances are that person knows kind of the lifetime value of an email address and is going to use that as kind of a benchmark for your performance. So doing a batch validation and maybe uncovering that, hey, 15, 20, 30% of this data is invalid, we have to kind of reset our expectations of how much revenue is in here, I think is a really good first step to take whenever you're kind of looking at a data set, new to a data set, or that data set's being transitioned within a platform. And clients will often pose the question to us, well, how often should we be redoing that? Is that something that should be part of our kind of data quality process? And each customer has to kind of make their own decision. So we feel the best approach is to educate folks about their data. So as a general rule, about 15 to 18% of consumer emails will go bad each year. Folks will stop using those emails. Maybe they're using Verizon.net, a paid internet service provider email that they will no longer use. And about 25 to 30% of B2B emails will turn over each year. So, the average person is at a job just under 4 years. So those numbers on the business side kind of align with, kind of industry turnover. So with those numbers in mind, you break that out by quarter, you can have anywhere from 6 to 10% of your data going bad each quarter. So being mindful of that, I think, is important. If at what Brian was kind of alluding to earlier, if you're mailing to records on an ongoing basis and having at least one email out every 30 or 60 days, you may get a very low bounce rate from those just turning over, and you'll have a kind of organic process of weeding them out. But, if you go 4 or 5 months without engaging in email, we have some clients that will actually put a last mail to date on a record within their CRM or data management platform. and then use that as a guide to say, okay, when this record hits, a certain time frame, we're going to go send it for validation. And beyond just validation, just kind of managing your database in terms of, how those records are aging and what segments they're falling into. And just to touch on
mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt in too. Just to jump in on that. So deliverability, right? So that's what we're coming back to. Is we talked about the web form and saying, hey, let's make sure we capture good data because data is valuable. But then the second piece is the deliverability component, and as Matt's referring to, mailing to that undeliverable data is going to have a negative impact on that deliverability algorithm, or Gmail or Google or Verizon Media, what their perception of you is, your IP address reputation, but data quality is a big piece of that. So this batch processing is going to address that. As Matt said, if you're mailing on a regular, your batch processing could just be on, newly captured data that maybe your tech team is saying, hey, I can't do a web form. The API stuff is way too much work. Let's instead capture that data and post a nightly file to the API. And then when we go for our welcome message, first touch, we're in good shape. But then, the other cases would be, hey, that data's on the shelf. Let's re-engage to it, as Matt said, or that initial health check is maybe you're migrating from one CRM provider to another, or maybe you're just a new person on the job and you're saying, hey, I don't know what I have in my hands here. Let's get this cleaned up first. So deliverability is, I think, what you want to keep in mind there. Again, how your mail is being treated by those big mailbox providers.
Sure. And Brian, I think to touch on the importance of the API is it's such an important second step to kind of validate and enforce what you're doing with batch processing. So if you're going to undertake the job of validating your whole database initially and getting current status on those, to not have, to your point, either an ongoing batch process or an API process, you're just going to accelerate that data deteriorating. The analogy I make is that, hey, you spent all Saturday, cleaning your house. You don't all of a sudden want everyone coming in and walking around, with their shoes on. So the API essentially is prompting people to take their dirty shoes off at the door, leave them there. So all the work you just did to get your house or your database current is not accelerated with bad data getting into the database. And I think deliverability and engagement, as you mentioned on, is really kind of an important component because, maybe 5-6 years ago when we would have this conversation, the focus was just on, hey, remove the bounces. But now, Google and Yahoo and Oath, all these other platforms, they're really looking for engagement. And Gmail looks at their customers as their customers, right? So when they're in their Gmail, they don't want them bombarded with emails that they're not clicking or opening. That's, to Gmail, taking away from that user's experience. And I think that's kind of an important point of view to point out, because it's not that they didn't sign up for your email or you don't have the right to email them. Gmail's looking at it as they're in our platform and environment, so I need to protect that. So I think that a lot of what we're doing, especially on the hygiene side, is going to help protect your engagement rates, which should really be more of a focus than necessarily just the bounce rates when you look at your overall performance.